Hello, if you want to watch exclusive lemon content on What If Naruto, then go to my Boosty. The first link in the description here contains such hot stories for adults, such as What If Naruto was a daddy for Sarada, or Kushina and Mikoto vulgar Naruto mommies. Follow the link and enjoy. I'm waiting for you.
Of course he didn't tell the others that he was now dating an Anbu. Gods only knew what could happen at that stage. The only ones who knew about that were Kakashi, Jiraiya, and Tsunade so far. As soon as he opened the door to his apartment, he found himself suddenly aware that he was not alone in his home and quickly took out a kunai and moved into his home. Much to his surprise, he found a large takeout box from the Ichiraku ramen shop, and on the table were several large bowls of steaming ramen, all of which were his favorite flavor. He wondered what was going on as he walked closer and saw a note. Dear Naruto-kun, I hope you enjoy the meals I bought for you, but if you're not in the mood for ramen tonight, then that's okay. I have something that's just as good, or better, waiting for you in your bedroom. The Kyuubi container wondered just what was going on around here and decided to put the ramen aside for the moment and find out just who was in his home. He knew that what he was doing was not exactly in his normal range of actions, but he needed to know just who was in his home. As he made his way to his room, he found his room clean and well ordered, and there was indeed someone in his room. It was a person with a cloak and wearing a mask that he quickly recognized to be the type worn by Anbu, and he was getting even more confused, but he kept the kunai in his hand even though he was not very sure yet about his ability to fight a full-time Anbu, as he knew that despite not being in the field most of the time, Anbu were not to be taken lightly under any case. There's no need for that, Naruto-kun. Naruto looked surprised as he heard none other than Azuki Yugo's voce. And sure enough, the Anbu removed her mask, and sure enough, it was indeed Azuki Yugo who smiled warmly at her lover. This made Naruto smile back and place away his kunai as he spoke to Azuki. Azuki-chan, what are you doing here? Azuki smiled impishly, as much as she wanted to keep her relationship with Naruto Uzumaki a secret from everyone in Konoha as she was an Anbu. She was not going to make the mistake of letting time that she and him could use together slip past her, and since there was no need for her to be on patrol, she felt it was time she paid her lover a visit. I wanted to see you, Naruto-kun. Did I catch you at a bad time? Not really. I'm just a little tired from all the training, that's all. Azuki smiled at that in a way that made Naruto blush a bit and wonder just what she was planning. And sure enough, she was planning something as she walked over to him and spoke. That's all right, you might not have wanted to eat the ramen, but I can always put them away and heat them up later for you to eat. And as for you, being tired is not a good thing, and that is a problem. I can fix that for you, Naruto-kun. Azuki removed her robe and Naruto's eyes bugged out as he saw her, without a stitch of clothing on. The look Naruto gave the female Anbu was priceless as she kissed him right on the lips. And as soon as his surprise passed on, Naruto was more than ready to jump in as he kissed Azuki back as they ran their hands on each other as Azuki helped Naruto remove his clothes. The Kyuubi whistled in its cage as it observed the whole thing and made preparations to make sure to record the whole thing. He was going to enjoy this day very much, and at least his container finally gets to enjoy life and the simple pleasures of being with a woman. It was an even better bonus that his container gets to be with an experienced woman. In this one, Kurenai is still single as she and Asuma are more friends than secret lovers in this one and are not married at the moment, and Naruto is already older, say 16 at the moment, and is back from his training with Jiraiya. So that means that Kurenai is not pregnant in this FIC, so don't bother me with the details on the matter. Now then, let's get this ball rolling. Naruto looked over the horizon and wondered just how things were back in Konoha at the moment. The blonde ninja was currently walking on a beach and trying to think about how things were back home. At the moment, the blonde was trying to figure out how in the heck did this all happen. It had been at least a day after the ship that he had been riding on had been somehow blown off course and hit by a massive hail of winds and rain. The blonde ninja had just left Fire Country to go to a city located near the sea at the outer region of Spring Country due to some important trade agreements with Konoha that had to be dealt with days before, the ship had managed to make it halfway when the storm hit and the ship that he was on was suddenly being moved around and bashed by the winds and rain. Many of the crew had either abandoned ship or had been lost at sea. He was not alone, however, as Yuhi Kurenai was with him. The Jonin and him had been paired on this simple mission for the day as the others had been rather busy as of late, and Kurenai's team were all recuperating from a previously hard mission before, leaving the Jonin without a team for the moment. Sakura was also working on a number of badly injured patients. Sai was also among the injured, and both Kakashi and Yamato were on special assignment, and the same could be said for Asuma and his team as they were on a tracking mission to locate an informant who had information on the latest movements of Akatsuki at the moment. Guy and his team were also on their own duties in the field, thus he and Kurenai were the only ones Tsunade had on hand for this simple trade agreement mission. It had caught him off guard that he was going on alone on such a mission, and he argued with Tsunade, but one glare from the Hokage and a show of a fist was enough to remind the young genin what awaited him if he refused. Besides, Jiraiya was yet on another mission of his own, and that was to keep watch over Orochimaru and Sasuke for the time being. Naruto turned as Kurenai made her way towards him. When the storm hit, the massive winds and waves that it had managed to disable the ship's engines by flooding it with water and debris and forced off most of the crew, and they were about to leave themselves, but the power of the storm had been enough to make several of the moorings that held the last remaining lifeboats loosen and that made their own escape harder to accomplish. The two had been stopped from escaping when they had to help several of the injured crew off the boat. Thankfully the boat had not sunk but had moved along like a cork in the sea, and when the storm had abated hours later, the two found themselves alone on the boat. Thankfully they had come near some islands in the area. The boat they were on landed in a sandbar which was a fair distance from the island. They knew that they had no other choice but to leave, and with some effort, the two had managed to make a raft from the still serviceable wood and rope on the boat. They took what they could carry and left the boat and used some large wooden oars to make it to this island. The blonde walked over and spoke to Kurenai. "Are you all right, Kurenai-sensei?" "Hi. I did some looking around the beach and found no sign of any habitation. What about you, Naruto?" "Nothing, I'm afraid. Looks like no one's ever been on this island before apart from us." The Jonin and the genin decided to make another run of the island to see what they could find at the moment, and an hour or two later, they decided to grab some shade near some palm trees, and Naruto managed to use his kunai to cut down a coconut, and with some effort, the genin had been able to open it and get to the water and gave it to Kurenai. The Jonin smiled at that and took in the water from the coconut, and the two decided to find anything that they could use on the island, and they had a small campsite made first and promised to meet each other there when the time came to come back. As Naruto made his way into the island, he wondered what was he going to do while he was here. He certainly had no training for this sort of thing at the moment, yet another reason why he began to dislike the time he had wasted back in his academy days. It was then that the Kyuubi decided to speak to his jailer. "So Kit, what mess is this now? I don't smell any foes for you and me to fight. It's a long story, and I thought you were always awake or something. You haven't been on an exciting mission for the past few days, so what did you expect me to do? I got bored and went to sleep, so tell me, what exactly did I miss?" The blonde ninja told the Kyuubi just what it had managed to sleep past, and the Kyuubi had to admit that it was surprised that it had slept through all that. Sure, there was no battles where he might have to pitch in to keep itself from dying due to the kid's stubborn nature, but being in a situation where anything could kill you in a flash was cause for concern. "So we're stuck on an island, Just great. And who's with us?" "Hinata-san sensei. Kurenai sensei." "Kurenai? Who the heck is that? Hold on. Oh, you mean that hot raven-haired woman with the red eyes? Well, at least you're in good company. What's that supposed to mean?" "Hey, that's something you'll need to find out on your own. Speaking of which, you have a clue on where we can find food?" "We got some supplies off the ship. I don't know about food though." "I guess that means we go hunting then. Come on, Kit, time to use the old senses." The Kyuubi used its chakra to help enhance Naruto's other senses in order to hunt the food that they might need in order to survive. Along the way the genin looked and found the island that he and Kurenai were on to be rather large and certainly something of worthy note. There were large numbers of trees and plants everywhere, and there were large amounts of animal tracks in the area as well. This meant that the island was certainly inhabited by wildlife, and Naruto got an encounter with one as he landed and was forced to move and get ready a kunai as he found himself suddenly attacked by what appeared to be a wild boar. The boar managed to catch Naruto off guard, but he quickly moved away and fired his kunai. The blow was dead on, but apparently the boar had a thicker head than most would have thought. Naruto quickly used his Kage Bushin and fired another set of kunai, and the boar fell down dead, and Naruto decided that he might as well take the corpse for food. He knew that anything that could ensure survival would be worth the effort, no matter how distasteful that might be. With that in mind, he and his Kage Bushin took the boar with them, and as soon as they arrived in the meeting place, the Kage Bushin were dispersed and Kurenai arrived, and the two decided to get some rest and get something to eat for the time being. Naruto managed to get a fire going with some salvaged matches and some dry driftwood and dry grass that they were able to find, and soon enough, there was the smell of cooking meat as the two ate the boar that Naruto killed. Throughout the whole thing, the two began to plan out how they were going to survive on the island, and the Kyuubi apparently had plenty of ideas as it spoke to its container. You'll need to conserve whatever supplies you managed to salvage from that ship kit. How do you figure that we need to conserve what we have? Look, Kit, in a situation like this, you need to be careful with what you have and make do with what you can find. Believe me when I say that making your supplies last is important as hell. Naruto thought about that and had to agree with the Kyuubi, and as soon as the meal was over, the two decided to continue scouting the island, and the blonde ninja decided to cut down travel time and use what his sensei Kakashi had taught him with the use of Kage Bushin, and spoke to Kurenai about that. Kurenai sensei, I'll do the scouting of the island for us so we all can rest. How do you plan to do that, Naruto-kun? I learned something from Kakashi sensei about Kage Bushin, and I've used it to speed up my training a great deal. I can use it to scout the island faster, and we don't have to waste all our time looking about. Besides, I have more chakra to spare. Kurenai thought it over and recalled what the Kage Bushin were originally used for, and that was as scouts, and when a Kage Bushin was dispersed, the information it gathered would be passed on to the original ninja. It was a perfect jutsu for scouting parties and could be used for training purposes. However, like all Jonin, including Kakashi, she knew about the powerful strain that would place on ninja, as dividing equal amounts of chakra between Kage Bushin would weaken the ninja, and the knowledge of the Kage Bushin came with a price, and that was the original ninja getting the same if not double or triple the exhaustion of the Kage Bushin. Are you sure about that, Naruto-kun? Don't worry, Kurenai-sensei, I'll be careful. With that, Naruto unleashed a horde of Kage Bushin and sent them out to scout the island, and the Kage Bushin were moving about, and the Kage Bushin did cover more ground on the island much faster than the two ninja did, and Naruto grinned as his Kage Bushin reached different parts of the island, and when they were done with their search, they were dispersed and the information came back to him, and he smiled at the information being relayed to him by the now dispersed Kage Bushin was pretty good to say the least. The island was rather large. Not too big at the moment, but certainly large enough to support a large amount of living things, and there seemed to be some good places to rest, namely where a large river of pure fresh water made its way from a large spring in the interior of the island, along with so many trees and more. The genin smiled but felt a bit exhausted as he realized that while he had not been training in the use of his elemental affinity, his use of the Kage Bushin at that number was tiring. He leaned down and panted as he had his hands on his knees and took in his breath. Quickly he was covered in sweat as the exhaustion came to him. Kurenai quickly moved towards him and held him, ready to support him should his exhaustion overtake him at a very important time. Kurenai knew that she would have to be there to help Naruto as much as he would help her as well. She looked at his exhausted face and spoke her concern for his well-being. Are you all right, Naruto-kun? Naruto took in a few gulps of air and smiled at Kurenai and replied. I'm fine, Kurenai-sensei, just need a little rest. The Jonin was not entirely convinced with his words as she looked at the exhaustion, but knew that through her observation of the blonde ninja for the past many years, he was not the kind to take things as they came. she couldn't help but smile mentally as she recalled his battle with Kiba, and then with Neji, as he was the most stubborn ninja and it took a lot to make him back down from any challenge. With that in mind, she decided to just be there to help him as Naruto got his breath back into his body. As soon as he was done, he told Kurenai about the spring that was near the area, and the Jonin smiled at the thought of having a place to take a bath. She had been soaked badly by the cold water from both the storm and the ocean, and she knew that unless she cleaned her clothes soon, they would rot and break down, and she didn't have any spares to wear at the moment. The two ninja decided to rest before doing anything for a bit and organize the supplies. The Kyuubi also kept track of the situation as it also surveyed what the two ninja had on them at the moment, and it determined that they would have to salvage what they could from the boat that was intact on the sandbar at the moment. They were going to need every bit they could find to make sure that they were going to be all right. Hey kid, what sort of supplies do you have to work with? We still have plenty of matches left over. At least 4 boxes worth and some leftover flares. Both are all dry at least. We still have our shuriken and kunai too. There are some containers of food, but we'll have to be careful that they don't spoil. Some coils of rope, a few cloth bundles, some needles. That's about the stuff we could salvage from the boat without sinking the raft. We'll have to make a supply run for the time being, Kit. See what else we can salvage from the wreck of that boat you were on. In the meantime, I suggest you and the lady find some decent shade. The heat is going to be really intense, and I doubt you two had any sunscreen on you. The two headed out and managed to take some shade as the hot sun beat down on the beach, and the two ninja wondered what was going to happen at the moment. They were already full, and the food in their 5 stomachs gave them the energy to do whatever they needed to do while they were on the island at the moment. We'll need to pitch camp near the spring and the river. You two are going to need fresh water for just about everything here at the moment, so trust me that we need to get moving when the day gets cooler. Why? Naruto heard the Kyuubi give a growl of irritation, and the Kyuubi made a sarcastic reply. Simple, Kit. You need water. As far as I know, humans like yourself can live for days without food, to a point at least, but you need water more than anything. You don't drink enough water, you dehydrate, and you get all sorts of sicknesses, the last one being the most damaging and permanent. What? Death, obviously. Now wait until the day cools down a bit and get moving to that spring when you get the chance. The less energy you waste, the better you last in a place like this one. As soon as the heat became bearable, Kurenai followed Naruto as they made their way to the spring in question, and when they arrived, the spring was rather nice. There was a small hill there with stones nearby and trees about, mostly tropical trees at that, and there was a rather large lake of the spring water there with some boulders present as well. If the situation had been reversed, then Naruto would have thought that this was hot spring resort. The genin couldn't help but feel the need for a drink, and Kurenai could see that. She helped Naruto sit down as he was still a bit exhausted, and the blonde ninja took a drink and found the water to be cool and fresh, no salt, and he sighed. Man, I needed that. Kurenai smirked at the look on Naruto's face as he seemed more relaxed. The day wore on, and Naruto knew that they had to find some shelter for the time being. The two decided to head back to the boat and see what they could salvage. The Kyuubi directed Naruto to search in the lower areas of the boat, namely the cargo space, and there they found some leftover tools and some repair supplies such as nails, metal wire, waterproof duct tape, and waterproof glue as well, no doubt used by sailors to keep the boat in good condition. The two ninja ferried the supplies while there was still daylight left at the moment, and it was already mid-afternoon. They also found other supplies in the area that could prove helpful. The galley were relatively intact. Though to Naruto's disappointment, the food stores were flooded and would no doubt rotting soon. A shame too, but there was some containers of food that survived and would serve well as supplies for them, along with some of the cooking tools that could be used for other things. And to Naruto and Kurenai's surprise, the spices supply cabinet, where the cooks stored the spices used for cooking and flavoring, were safe, and so were the contents. They took what they could, but knew that they would need more than just their raft to ferry their salvage. Naruto remedied that quickly as he summoned his Kage Bushin and went to work in taking out several more still serviceable boards from the boat, and with tools in hand and Kurenai directing the whole thing, they were able to make 3 more rafts, though they were larger and better in terms of flotation and control. The rafts moved away from the boat, one with Naruto and Kurenai in it, while the other three were piloted by Naruto's Kage Bushin. The small band arrived in Naruto's Kage Bushin, loaded the supplies in, and despite Kurenai's protests on how taxing the work was, Naruto went to work on building a special lean-to. The Kyuubi loaned a larger portion of its chakra to its container, and that gave Naruto and his Kage Bushin the energy to use the tools to cut down several tall bamboo trees, and then set up the lean-to that they were going to use for shelter at this time. The Kyuubi also informed Naruto how to properly build one so it would be easy to build and easy to disassemble and would be strong enough to withstand most of the elements. Kurenai watched the whole thing while she was still worried that Naruto would exhaust himself to death. She had to admire his tenacity and determination as the genin built the shelter in time for night to settle in. Naruto cheered on along with his Kage Bushin. Finished. As soon as the Kage Bushin faded away, Naruto sighed and he closed his eyes and fell down. Kurenai gasped and quickly caught him as he was now utterly exhausted. Kurenai listened to his heart and breathing rate and was relieved that he was okay and he was conscious. The Jonin saw that night was now on them, and despite the fact that she was a bit tired herself, Kurenai managed to lift Naruto and take him into the lean-to that was built in a clearing that was a close distance from the lake made by the spring and then to the beach. The lean-to was tall enough for her and Naruto to sit down on, as Naruto took in consideration the fact that she was taller than him and needed more room for her head so she would not be injured. As she placed the blonde down on the grass below them, Kurenai couldn't help but study the blonde for a few minutes as the clear sky allowed the moon to show up, creating a silvery glow on the area, and she got to study the blonde carefully. Despite being sun-kissed and having a tan, Naruto had a silvery hue to his skin, making him more ethereally attractive in the eyes of the Jonin. She, however, placed those thoughts aside for the time being. The first reason was that it was considered inappropriate for someone of her age to be looking at Naruto in such a fashion, and the second was the fact that she knew that Hinata was utterly infatuated with Naruto, and it would be a blow to her student if she found out her sensei was looking at Naruto the same way she used to. She was also aware of the fact that Naruto had the Kyuubi inside of him. Despite being a young Jonin, she had been 17 and a high-ranking Chunin during the time of the attack of the Kyuubi on Konoha, and she had been evacuating wounded ninja to be treated when she heard the news of the death of the Yondaime when he used a jutsu to seal away the Kyuubi. Like all the ninja that day who survived the bloody and costly assault, she mourned the Hokage's death, one their brightest, most talented, and youngest leaders, and the most kind-hearted and brave man to ever be known. For her, however, the loss had been harder. When she was younger, she had a deep crush on the Yondaime, and she would follow him whenever she would see him during his usual trips around Konoha when he worked hard in keeping the peace and making sure that everyone in the village was in good hands. He was the perfect man in her young eyes so long ago and still was. She had gathered the courage to ask him out on a date, but she never got far as the Hokage was always busy with many things. And when he died saving Konoha, she was among the first to place the flowers on his grave. Kurenai placed those thoughts aside for the moment and focused on getting some food and drink ready for Naruto as soon as he was awake. He had used up a lot of his chakra for the whole day until the afternoon, and knowing how much ramen he ate in one setting, the Jonin knew that he was going to be very much famished when he woke up. She knew that she was not the best cook, but her cooking was more than good enough to be worthy. Though she couldn't help but wonder how would Naruto like her cooking, as this would be the very first time she had cooked for anyone. Hours later, Naruto opened his eyes and felt his stomach growl like mad as he realized that he had nothing to eat since lunchtime. The fire that was burning outside of the lean-to that he had built with the aid of his Kage Bushin told him that it was no doubt late evening. The smell of food was enough to jolt him awake, and when he turned, he spotted a plate filled with food and in rather large piles, and despite his slightly hazy state of mind at the moment, he was eager for food and he quickly grabbed the plate and ate ravenously. He was so engrossed with eating that he failed to see Kurenai walking towards the lean-to and sitting down before him. The Jonin had gone away to wash her plate when she heard the sounds of eating. Kurenai couldn't help but look on in shock as Naruto was eating food away with such speed that it was like a blur before her eyes. Wow, he eats fast. No wonder he can finish so many bowls of ramen in one setting. I guess that's why I usually see Iruka pray when he and Naruto-kun go out together back in the academy. Naruto-kun's appetite must be murder on his wallet. Kurenai smiled a bit at that as she recalled seeing Iruka usually praying to the kami and holding his wallet that held his salary as a Chunin instructor in the academy. She had to give Iruka credit for being like a father to Naruto. Unlike any of the other residents of Konoha, Iruka had become close to Naruto and was among the few people Naruto cared for and trusted in the village, with the exceptions of Kakashi, Sakura, Tsuki, Ayame, and a few others Naruto was close to. She had heard about the time when Mizuki had tricked Naruto into stealing the Book of Seals and how the traitorous bastard had tried to kill both Naruto and Iruka, but not before breaking the law of not telling Naruto why he was treated the way he was. It had been a very difficult stage in the words of the third when she talked with him about it weeks before he died. He had been utterly worried that Naruto would lose himself to anger, despair, and worse, but it was Iruka's words in his defense that made Naruto fight back and learn the Kage Bushin and defend Iruka, and what was why Naruto graduated as a genin. Iruka saw Naruto as a kid brother and something of a son, which made sense why he was opposed to having him, Sasuke, and Sakura in the Chunin exams when Kakashi suggested it. Kurenai watched as all the food before her in the plate was devoured in what appeared to be seconds as the blonde ninja inhaled the food she had cooked. Naruto gave a loud sigh as the food was settling into his gut. She was lucky she had cooked double portions for Naruto alone. Had she not, then the blonde kid would have eaten her food as well, another reason why she was thankful to have eaten early. Ah, oh yeah, that hit the spot. Kurenai couldn't help herself and burst out laughing as Naruto leaned back and patted his stomach in such a comic way that she couldn't help herself. That allowed Naruto to realize that he was not alone and he looked at Kurenai who was laughing with a smile on her face. He blushed a bit as he realized he was making a fool of himself. Sure, he didn't mind too much as that brought him attention, but he was older now and more mature than when he was still 12. He waited until Kurenai stopped laughing and smiled at him. I'm sorry for laughing, Naruto-kun, but you were so funny I couldn't help myself. Ah, it's okay, Kurenai-sensei, but the food was nice. You made them. The Jonin nodded and Naruto smiled as he felt the food peacefully settle into his stomach and he thanked the Jonin. Thank you for the meal, Kurenai-sensei, I really appreciated it. Not a problem, Naruto-kun. You used up so much energy the whole day to help out. I figured that making you a good meal and letting you rest would be a good way to pay you back. How was the food? What do you mean? Well, this is the first time I ever cooked for someone other than myself, so I was just curious about how my cooking was. It was great, Kurenai-sensei. I had no idea you were a great cook. Kurenai smiled at that, thinking about the hard effort she learned on how to cook. She had actually intended to cook for the Yondaime and the chance she could have some time alone with him. After he had died in battle with the Kyuubi, she had thought about abandoning her training in cooking, but decided to keep it and use it as a way to honor the man she had a deep affection for but never got the chance to express that affection to. It was her private way to honor the man, and that made her think about so many things, until she spotted something on Naruto's face. You missed a spot on your face. Oh, I'll get it. Let me. Naruto looked as Kurenai leaned forward and used her bandaged right hand to wipe the spot of food sauce on his face. He was a bit surprised that Kurenai would do that to him, but that was when he looked forward and found himself staring right at Kurenai's face and more importantly to her S. And while the kunoichi was still dressed, the posture she had at the moment allowed him to see her chest quite well despite the fact she wore a fishnet suit like all the other kunoichi who resided in Konoha, including her fellow Jonin Anko. Naruto mentally gulped and felt his face heat up as he realized just what was happening at the moment as he found himself looking at Kurenai's chest, and naturally her S, which were rather. No, idiot. Get a damn grip. Naruto mentally breathed a sigh of relief when Kurenai moved away from him and stood up and moved to a nearby pile of clothes that were nearby and she handed on to him and spoke to him. Here, these will help us out a lot for now. Naruto nodded and tried to banish what he had seen just only moments before. As he lay down, he felt his mind's eye go back to the scene of seeing Kurenai leaning towards him on and then seeing her face. Sure, he admitted that Kurenai was attractive as a woman, but that was the first time he had ever seen her up close like that and then seeing her. Ow. Damn it. The Kyuubi's voice came in and the Kyuubi was laughing in a very amused fashion at the moment. It had seen the entire thing and it felt the energy of Naruto's reaction to that unintentional show of cleavage from the very attractive crimson-eyed woman, and it was laughing so hard at all of it, and it decided to speak to its container. Well now, how was the view? What view are you babbling about? Why do you even need to ask Kit? I think her measurements were nice. Not the same as that Hokage named Tsunade, who's very impressive by the way, but it's a damn shame she's actually using henge. Hey, don't make fun of Tsunade Obasan like that, you darn fox. And I wasn't looking. The Kyuubi, however, was far from convinced about Naruto's statements and decided to tease his container a bit more. Fair enough. So, what size do you think is this Kurenai's choice of bras and what? Shut up. The Kyuubi laughed and replied. Take it easy, Kit. I'm just joking. Besides, I think you should consider yourself lucky. You're stuck with a woman like her and she's hot too. Most humans I know would love to be in your shoes or rather sandals at this point and time. Ah, the possibilities abound. Gah. Sometimes I think the pervy sage is rubbing off on you, Kyuubi. Ha. You think that perverted sage is influencing me? Kid, you have no idea how wrong you are about that facet of my existence, but we'll save that for another time. Naruto was eternally grateful for the outside silence and inside silence as he closed his eyes and tried to fall asleep. He had a feeling that he needed to properly rest in order to get the energy he needed in order to do the things that had to be done in order for him and Kurenai to survive long enough to be rescued at this point and time. He had a feeling, however, that things were going to get even worse later on, though in what fashion, he had no idea at the moment. The next day, Naruto yawned and got up from his place in the lean-to and got a drink of cool water from the spring after he got up and washed his face. As soon as he did so, the Kyuubi spoke to him. Time to head out and grab some breakfast, Kit. Right. Naruto took off and began to scour the island to look for whatever food they could find on the island to ensure that they would have plenty of food to eat on the island at the moment. The Kyuubi then guided Naruto to the interior of the island and there they found a myriad of trees, bushes and plants. The Kyuubi then began to point out many of the plants and their uses to the blonde ninja, and while Naruto had grown up a bit more ever since he had begun to travel with Jiraiya, some of the things the Kyuubi said didn't make too much sense to the blonde ninja at first, but the Kyuubi showed patience with Naruto and explained carefully everything as they gathered the plant life that was helpful and edible. So these berries are safe to eat. Yes, good for energy and taste, good for cooking too, just make sure to pick the ones which are not facing upwards or you've had it. Why? Because they usually are toxic to most living things, and while I can cure you of most if not all poisons with my chakra kit, you don't need to suffer hour-long cramps, diarrhea, and headaches in a place like this. Okay. The two headed out and Naruto used the Kage Bushin to make sure that they would find other food sources, and the duo managed to haul a large number of berries, fresh nuts, edible herbs, wild fruit, and amazingly enough, edible bird eggs. The trio made it back in just in time to see Kurenai wake up and wash her face in the water for the day. Naruto couldn't help but stare at how the light made Kurenai's face look angelic, and even if she was not wearing the makeup she seemed to normally have on, she was still very attractive. Wow. Wow is right. Makes me curious why she's not gotten married yet, Kit. Why don't you ask her? What? Are you out of your mind, you darn fox? I can't ask her that. That's totally private. True. But it's not like you've got anything else to do on this island, Kit. Apart from doing all you can to survive, you should have something to keep your spirits up. And let me tell you that having company is way better than being stranded all by yourself, Kit. You'd go nuts if you were alone. No matter what you say, I am not asking her that. I didn't say you ask her now, you know. Just wait until she opens up to talk to you. Trust me, conversation is the key to keeping your head straight in a situation like this. And you're darn lucky you have another person to talk to. I'd go nuts if I have to be your companion for the next few days all the time. Kurenai turned and spoke to Naruto, who seemed to be deep in thought, and she wondered just what was it that seemed to get his interest so much. Naruto-kun, are you alright? Yeah, I'm alright, Kurenai-sensei. Just had some things to think about. I managed to find us some food for today. Naruto said as he displayed the supplies he had managed to collect for the day, and Kurenai smiled at the haul of greenery that Naruto had brought in, and then the two of them began to hunt for other food and followed the stream that they were close to and found some good medium-sized lakes that had some pretty good fish. Naruto used his kunai to catch as much as he could manage with his kage bushin helping along, while Kurenai did the same thing, and in an hour or so at the break of the sun's first light, they had been able to catch a handful of fish for their breakfast. The two trooped back and began to cook the food in the fire that Kurenai started as they got back. The smell of cooking fish and hard-boiled eggs filled the air as the Jonin used the herbs that were somewhat spicy to flavor the fish and make them wonderful to the taste, and the two ninja ate their food as the cooking was over, though they had to be careful with the fire to avoid burning down the entire area of the island they were in. As soon as they were done with breakfast, Naruto cleaned the dishes and allowed Kurenai to take a bit of a rest from all the cooking. The two rested for the day, and when the sunlight was good they began to explore the rest of the island together as Naruto's memories from his kage bushin helped them scout the island. Apparently there were a lot of things on the island that were going to be very helpful to them, but as far as they could find out, there was no sign of habitation on the island, and that was a great shame, as they knew that if there was any sign of habitation in the area then they would be able to make their way back to Konoha, but they didn't have the supplies to do that, and therefore, they would have to wait and hope that the people in Konoha would mount a rescue effort, but at the moment the two were concerned with finding out just what they could use in the island to help them. There were large numbers of trees such as coconut palm trees, bamboo, hardwood, and more, along with various shrubs and vines that could be useful in many ways. As the two got what they needed, there were enough salvaged supplies from the boats to help them with their time here on the island at the moment, but they knew that those were limited and they had to gather what they could find naturally in the land to make up for that. The two managed to locate several extra trees to help them construct several signal fires that they would light when they spotted a ship coming in the area in the island. The signal fire construction took at least several long hours and the heat was growing around them, but they knew that they had to do this in order to make sure that they would have a chance to signal any passing ships for a rescue. The day wore on, and when the time of midday arrived, the two stopped when they made the last signal fire and the store of fuel for the fire. The two of them were very tired and decided to grab some of the rations that they had on hand with them on the trip. The food comprised of dried fruit and meat, and while Kurenai was not a big fan of the stuff, she was more than willing to grab a bit to eat as she needed the food and energy. Naruto did the very same thing as well as he ate the food he had. Kurenai and Naruto took shelter in a nearby clump of palm trees, and Naruto quickly cut down several coconuts and opened them up with his kunai, and they were able to have a drink. As the two looked at the scene before them, the sun making the ocean before them glitter like diamonds, Naruto decided to break the ice and spoke. If things were different, I'd call this place paradise. So would I, Naruto-kun, by the way. Yes, Kurenai-sensei. May I ask what you plan to do once we do get rescued? Naruto thought about it for only a second and quickly replied. I'd go back and rescue Sasuke. Kurenai wondered about that. She knew that Sasuke was a traitor of Konoha due to siding with Orochimaru and being allied with Sound, all for power. She thought about that and wondered why Naruto would risk a lot, even his life, to rescue Sasuke. She knew that the two don't always see eye to eye and were rivals. Yet Naruto did his best to save Sasuke when he turned his back on all of Konoha and then coming close to slaying him in the battle in the valley. And now, they were enemies. Yet despite all this, despite the fact that Sasuke was no longer the very same young man, Naruto was willing to rescue him. She decided to ask him why he would risk all this to save one person. Naruto-kun, I know this might sound odd and no doubt offensive to you, but why do you want to save Sasuke? Because he is my teammate. I know that, but after all he did for power, turning on Konoha, nearly killing you, and more. Naruto looked at Kurenai with a hard look, showing that he was not liking this train of conversation, and he couldn't help but feel his anger beginning to grow, and that he tried his best to not lash out at Kurenai. He had respect for Kurenai and more, as he had helped her and Hinata, Kiba, and Shino in saving her former student in charge Yakumo from becoming consumed by the demon in her mind, and here she was asking him something that he didn't want others to ask, and he replied, "Why do you want to know? What business is that of yours, Kurenai-sensei? Please calm down, Naruto-kun, I mean no offense by that. No, you think you understand why I do what I do. Naruto-kun." Naruto stood up and turned his back on the Jonin, showing his back to her, and he then replied in a strained voice. He was the first bond I ever had. Him, Iruka-sensei, Sakura-chan, and Kakashi-sensei, they were the only people who ever acknowledged me. I didn't care if that Sasuke-tem acted all high and mighty or like a Totala times. He was the first friend I ever had. We were friends, and in a way, he was like a brother to me, and then all this crap happens. And now that bastard Orochimaru's turned him into a mockery of the Sasuke I knew, my friend. And that Itachi, well, I won't let either of them destroy that bond I have with Sasuke, even if he has changed. Because I swore to protect those close to me, because I am truly strong when I protect those I care about. I won't lose anyone dear to me anymore. Kurenai could see that Naruto meant every word that he had said. Dadan couldn't help but admire that bravery. She had thought of him as the class clown all those years ago, but he had proven her wrong, and to hear that coming from Naruto made her all the more curious about him. She sighed and reached out to his shoulder and replied, "I understand, I'm sorry about how my question sounded, Naruto-kun." Naruto sensed that Kurenai meant what she said and nodded. "It's all right, Kurenai-sensei, sorry about losing it before." The two decided to rest for a bit until they moved on and decided to head back to their camp, and Kurenai went to work on making something to eat for dinner while Naruto decided to go out and hunt for what they might need for the meal, and after some time and some creative use of Kage Bushin he was able to bring in some fresh seafood, namely some shellfish, and fish. As soon as that was over they were able to have a good meal, and Naruto looked at the stream and seemed lost in thought. It was then that he decided to follow the Kyuubi's advice and talk to Kurenai. "Kurenai-sensei." The Jonin turned as she had been busy watching the sky when she heard Naruto call her attention, and she turned to face the blonde ninja. "Yes. Do you have any family?" The Jonin was somewhat surprised by the question. Truth be told, she had no knowledge of her family at the time. She was quite young and it had been years since anyone had ever asked about her past life. Naruto was the very first person to ask her that question in a long time. Not even her team or her surrogate daughter Hinata had ever asked that question. "Why do you want to know?" Well, I guess I wanted to know more about you." Kurenai smiled a bit at that and replied in a teasing fashion. "Oh, are you asking me for a date, Naruto-kun?" Naruto blushed and replied, No. Well, I was just curious. If you don't want to answer the question, then forget I. Relax, Naruto-kun, I was only teasing you. To tell you the truth, I have no memory of my family, I don't remember them all that well, and over the years I eventually forgot them until now. All I remember was seeing two people in my past dreams. One was a man who could have been my father, said something about my eyes, and my mother saying that they were like the crimson of the setting sun, and they gave me my name. I don't recall their faces anymore, but they were nice to me, and even if I don't remember them, they are part of me." Naruto gave a slightly sad look that he had touched a part of Kurenai's past that she forgot, and for all he knew, her parents might have died. "I'm sorry," Kurenai replied kindly. "Don't be, it was nice to think about them. What about you, Naruto-kun?" Naruto looked sadly and replied in a weaker voice. "I don't know, I have no memory of my family. I don't know if they are alive or dead, and I doubt they would want anything to do with me." Kurenai was shocked at this and wondered why Naruto would say that. "What do you mean by that, Naruto-kun? Because of the Kyuubi in me, what kind of parents would want to live with the fact that their son is the container of a demon? They would no doubt have hated me for being the way I am now, and back then, how would they be able to live with me?" Kurenai walked over to him and made him look at her as she sternly spoke to the distraught blonde. Don't ever say that, Naruto-kun. No mother or father would hate their own child that way. I know I don't understand your pain, but don't think that. I feel that no matter what happened, you parents loved you with all their hearts. No mother and father would not love their child in their hearts, and I feel that they loved you more than you know. Kurenai looked at Naruto, who was still silent, and she feared that he was not listening to her, and she was not liking this at all. She knew that Naruto had been an only child, and that made her think about how he had grown up alone, and no doubt the fact that he was the container of the Kyuubi made it hard for him for a very long time. Do you think so, Kurenai-sensei? I do, Naruto-kun. I know I never knew your family or met them, but if they did die when you were young, their last thoughts were no doubt on you and how much you mean to them. I know that I am not really sure if there is truth to it, but I know that no matter what, parents love their children in ways that are hard at times to understand, but there is no denying that they love them. Naruto smiled at that and answered back. Thank you, Kurenai-sensei. Kurenai nodded and saw that despite Naruto's smiling face, there were tears flowing down his eyes as they were closed, and the sight of the young ninja being happy and crying at the same time tugged at her heartstrings, and without hesitating in the slightest, she reached out and gently wiped away Naruto's tears from his face. The two spent some time getting used to the rather tender moment between them, and Kurenai decided to help Naruto with some last-minute work. They had gathered a large number of soft and thick leaves and some smooth and non-abrasive clothes that they had salvaged from the ship. With some hard work and a bit of trial and error, the two stranded ninja managed to make some makeshift pillows and beddings, while the other cloth pieces were used to make blankets and were kept in reserve for more important matters. As they slept, the Kyuubi spoke to its container. When I said you talked to her, I wasn't expecting you to be showing your heart all the way through, kid, but I got to admit, that certainly was interesting. Shut up, Kyuubi, I meant everything I said. To Naruto's surprise, the Kyuubi didn't laugh, but the Kyuubi then replied. I know you did, Kit, at least you got that out of your bloody system, and she did make you feel better at least. I guess. Hey, get some sleep, it's going to be a long week. The next day, the two established something of a routine. They would wake up early at the crack of dawn in order to gather what they needed in order to prepare the food they would need each morning, and use the supplies that they knew they had to use, like the food, so to avoid the food from rotting. They then would explore the island, and to their relief, the island had a good bounty of food that could help keep them alive a great deal. Plenty of edible herbs that the Kyuubi had pointed out to the blonde ninja, wild fruits such as apples, grapes, oranges, bananas and the like, which meant that the island must have plenty of healthy soil to have these kinds of fruits that grew in it. There were also some wild vegetables in the other parts of the still unexplored island that they found, and there seemed to be a good number of wild animals in the area. Several tracks told them that there were wild boars on the island, along with birds, rabbits, large birds, and some wild goats as well, more than enough creatures to hunt when needed. The Kyuubi also explained some other things to Naruto, and the blonde, seeing that the information was truly helpful, didn't argue with the Kyuubi at this point in time. The two would then train in different parts of the island for privacy. Kurenai worked on her various skills and most importantly her genjutsu, while Naruto continued to train using his Kage Bushin in making the Rasengan and how to use the wind element into it. He had come close to it many times before being assigned for the mission that brought them to this situation. The blonde knew that he was going to be exhausted, so he decided to keep his Kage Bushin numbers to a small amount. Besides, the Kyuubi did hand him some decent advice. Train all you need to, Kit, but keep in mind that using up all your stamina in a situation like this is inviting disaster. Really? The Kyuubi growled a bit and replied. Yes, if you run out of energy, how the heck are you going to survive out here? And how can you help that Kurenai woman? She can take care of herself, that's for sure, but keep in mind that if you are not well and you give her double the trouble and effort, got that? Yeah, oh yeah, Kyuubi, yeah, thanks, for teaching me those things, kept me alive, and also Kurenai-sensei. No need for that, I do what I have to in order to keep you and me from dying, but you're welcome, you're probably the only human I know who says thank you to one of my kind. Really? Yeah, It's nice, but don't get funny ideas about that kit. I'm not turning soft yet, so get back to training. The two trained for some time, and this allowed them to keep their skills sharp and ready for anything that might happen while they were on the island, and doing things kept up their spirits. They would also take turns moving about on the island to see if there were any ships in the area, and this was where Naruto's Kage Bushin would truly help, as they would move about on the island and even walk on the water to see any ships in the area. The two would then head into the forest to hunt for food and would then head off to the camp and prepare for lunch. Naruto admitted that he was not a good cook, but Kurenai was patient and showed Naruto just how to prepare food, and while his efforts didn't make super good food, she gave him credit for effort, and that was enough for Naruto. Their supplies were good for at least a week or two, and that was hopefully enough time for a rescue. They then would also take quick swims in the beach or in the spring in order to deal with the heat. Naruto fashioned a small number of spears from some of his kunai weapons, a strong coil of rope and several tube bottles of glue, and from several long bamboo branches, and he and his clones would hunt for larger fish in the water and would often come back with several large fish in tow. Kurenai had to admit that Naruto was a real hard worker when he placed all his focus on the effort and situation. No wonder he was the only one who could master the training method of using Kage Bushin and still be able to pull it off. As the day wore on, Naruto would begin to open up to Kurenai and talk about how he had grown up. He normally didn't talk too much about his past with others, not even Kakashi or Sakura, his inner pain and loneliness. Only his father figure Iruka shared the same life he did and thus knew him more than anyone else. But he decided that since Kurenai talked to him about her own life, he needed to do the same. Later at night, after allowing Kurenai to clean up by herself in the spring while he stood guard over her, Naruto would then help in preparing dinner with her, and then after eating they would take the time to chat a bit more, and when it was late, they went to sleep. The next few days were following this routine, and the two got closer to one another, and Naruto felt comfortable enough to talk to Kurenai about his many adventures and how he saw things. It made Kurenai realize that while Naruto was childish at times and a bit dumb, he was gifted with a perception and understanding that only manifested when the subject in question was of interest to him and in his mind deserved his full attention. This proved to her that despite Naruto being childish at times, even now, he was not dense but had brimming talent underneath. In a way, he reminded her of a younger Yondaime. The image was uncanny. It was true that while she had never seen the Yondaime when he was younger, and only had seen him when he was older, she had no problem viewing Naruto as the younger version of the Yondaime, since for the past few days she had seen flashes of the same kindness and gentle nature that the Yondaime was famous for in Naruto. This made her begin to wonder about Naruto's parents. There was no way a kind-hearted child would have been abandoned callously like this. Something tragic must have happened, and she knew that the Yondaime was not only a kind and compassionate leader of the village and would never be heartless, but was smart and a genius as well. The one rumor she had nearly forgotten about was that the Yondaime had a female companion. No one knew her name or where she came from, but it was rumored that they were inseparable and she was pregnant, but no one knew where she was now or what happened to the rumored son of the Yondaime. She thought it over for the days that passed by and wondered that just maybe the missing child was Naruto himself. The ideas seemed absurd at first, but there was no denying that there were some facts about the Yondaime that matched Naruto as well. They both had the same drive to succeed. They were both kind-hearted and compassionate. They placed the welfare of others above their own. They both used the same technique, the Rasengan, and they were similar in appearance. Yes, Naruto was nowhere a genius, but that was the only thing that separated him from his possible father. The more she thought about it, the more she began to feel disgusted by the way Naruto had been treated all his life. If her suspicions were proven correct in the near future and Naruto was indeed the son of the Yondaime, then the villagers were going to have to live with the fact that they had been abusing the rightful son of their most compassionate leader. The only people who might know the truth could have been the third Hokage and even the current Hokage and Jiraiya-sama as well, as she knew for a fact that Jiraiya was the Yondaime's sensei. It was somewhat fitting that the teacher of the father was now the teacher of the son, and if Jiraiya had been able to mold the Yondaime into who he was then then there was no doubt in her mind Naruto would turn out all right. She also thought it over and realized that if it was true, then the reason no one suspected Naruto's parentage was the fact that since the Yondaime had many enemies in the past, they would not hesitate to strike at his family even though the Yondaime was so feared by others that they fled instead attack him. This also sent new feelings running in her. She began to see how handsome Naruto was in a way, not just because of his kindness, compassion, gentle heart, and bravery, but his own physical qualities as well. Jiraiya's training had burned away all trace of body fat from the blonde ninja, and there were times she got to see him without some of his clothes and saw how tall he was, completely unlike the short blonde kind she knew long ago, and when she looked at him, she began to feel. She would clamp down on those feelings from time to time, thinking that it was wrong. She felt guilty at the thoughts of being physically attracted to Naruto, as she knew that Hinata loved him and it would hurt Hinata if she decided to act on these feelings and attraction. But still, it was hard, as she admitted that her young crush on the Yondaime was still there all these years, and seeing a younger version of the Yondaime before her for the past few days was so tempting. She didn't see Naruto as the Kyuubi container, but a ninja of great promise, a young man with a kind and gentle nature, and very handsome as well. Naruto likewise found Kurenai to be really a kind and straightforward type of person. There was that incident with Yakumo that somewhat soured his thoughts of her at first, but that turned out all right and he did respect her. And he had to admit that she was rather nice and rather easy to talk to. However, he was curious as to why she had not been able to have a relationship or a husband by now. He tentatively asked that question to her at some point, and he was surprised that most men were afraid of her. He couldn't fathom why someone as attractive, strong, brave, kind, and skilled as her would not be wanted by a man, and he told her so on more than one instance, making her smile at that, and she replied that he no doubt heard of her reputation as the Crimson Goddess of Konoha, and he nodded as he was familiar with the reputation she had on her. That was the same reason men liked her and more but were too frightened to approach her. He asked about Asuma as they were close, and she replied that she and Asuma were good friends but they never got very far in their own relationship, and that made her rather sad. She did like Asuma but he never seemed to be able to say anything to make it go further, and they remained friends. She even said that maybe she would wind up a spinster when she would be older. He, however, was against the whole idea and replied that someday she would find the right guy for her, and if she wanted his help, he'd even find the man for her and bring him to her. Kurenai smiled at that and considered it, and it did him good to see Kurenai smile, but it also made him very uncomfortable. But not in a bad way, as he found Kurenai very attractive. There were times that he would catch her when she was relaxing and at ease, and this allowed him to see her beauty quite clearly. And for the past few nights, he began to have dreams concerning the red-eyed Jonin, and while they were rather interesting, he was not sure about how Kurenai would react if he decided to tell her about the vivid dreams he had been having for some time now, and it all started when he unintentionally had taken a peek at her s. The Kyuubi was not certainly helping in that regard, as it slyly teased him to try and talk to the Jonin about those feelings. Naruto would often blush bright red at the suggestions the fox would give him. And the mere thought of doing those things he dreamed about to Kurenai were very arousing, and he'd have to be a complete idiot to deny the fact that he was aroused by them as well. But still, he was unsure about how Kurenai would react. Would she be disgusted by him if he told her? Or will she hurt herself in trying to evade him? As he feared that despite being able to talk to her now, she would be horrified if he told her. He tried to recall his dreams of Sakura, but they were slowly being replaced by a certain red-eyed female Jonin. Back in Konoha, Tsunade was not in the best of moods at the moment as she worked on the documents that were before her at the moment. Her mind, however, was on the situation concerning Naruto and Kurenai's disappearance. The very second she heard the information about the storm that had struck the ship and forcing most of the people to leave, she had assumed that Naruto and Kurenai were safe and heading back after recovering from the ordeal with the other crew. But the very second she found out that they were not among the rescued, she quickly grilled the people who were there and vowed to find the two. The Hokage gave a groan as she looked out the window and hoped that Naruto and Kurenai were all right. She reminded herself that Naruto was not the same kid she met. Despite his still present childishness, he was older, wiser, stronger, and tougher than he was long before when they met. She cared for his safety, and knowing that he was with Kurenai was enough to help her deal with the situation for the time being. The storms had hit the port town several before, and while most ships were lightly damaged, the organization of a rescue fleet for Kurenai and Naruto was taking a lot longer than she liked. However, it was only recently that the ships had left the ports and were now using the coordinates where Naruto and Kurenai's ship were last located, and the fact that it was near some islands gave hope that they were there to be rescued. The Hokage turned and in walked Sakura, Sai, Kakashi and Yamato. The group looked at Tsunade and she knew what they were going to ask her. There's hope at least. There are some islands in the area that they could be in. It will take time, but hopefully by tomorrow the boats will be at those islands and we might find them there. I hope so, Tsunade-sama. Tsunade turned and saw the hope in Sakura's face. The Hokage smiled at her apprentice as she knew that despite not returning Naruto's affection, Sakura cared deeply for Naruto's safety at the moment, and that was enough. Sai also showed some concern, and she couldn't help but think about how much better a teammate Sai was compared to Sasuke, at least emotionally, though it amused Tsunade when Sakura complained about having Naruto and Sai with her, wishing she had normal people as team members, but in her personal thoughts, it would have been boring anyway, and despite the oddness the two had, they were a deadly team in most respects and worked all right despite their unique quirks and natures, and in her mind, Sakura served as the balance between the two. Just like before, though Tsunade often wished that both Naruto and Sai were more understanding of Sakura at times. The Hokage looked at the village of Konoha and wondered just what was happening with Naruto and Kurenai at the moment. Many of the other ninja teams were worried about the status of the two missing ninja, and she hoped that they would soon be found. The council were breathing down her neck and it galled her at times, but she ignored them as she had greater concerns at the moment. Hinata was busy hoping and praying for the safe return of her longtime crush and her sensei as she missed them terribly. Neji would assure her that the two would be fine, and when she heard that the rescue boats were already on the move she felt happier now as she hoped that they would be able to find Naruto and Kurenai soon. The same thoughts were on the minds of Shino and Kiba as well, while the other teams wondered just when the two would be found. Back on the island, as Naruto arrived at the camp early in mid-afternoon to get the supplies evening meal ready, he got into a conversation with the Kyuubi as the fox decided to speak to him about the recent unease he had around Kurenai for the past few days, namely when he found himself looking at her in more ways than one. Kit, you really need to let all that out of your system, or you're going to make a mess of yourself. And how do you propose I do that? Simple. Talk to her, see how she reacts. The sooner all those things are out of your system, you'll be on the road to recovery. Are you out of your bloody mind, Kyuubi? I can't just talk to Kurenai-sensei and tell her that I have been having wet dreams about her. Kit, no matter what you say at the moment, you are going to have to do something about those feelings and thoughts you have. I'll be honest with you, no matter how many times you place those things away from your mind, they will keep coming back to the surface and you will keep fighting them, but the mental strain will get worse. Keep it up and you'll snap, and the last thing we all need is you losing it on a deserted island. But still, the Kyuubi sighed and spoke to the blonde ninja. Kit, listen, she's a woman who's 30 years old for crying out loud and no doubt has dealt with men with lecherous tendencies. She's no doubt used to it by now, so I don't see the problem why you seem to avoid the issue like the damn plague. You know the reason I don't want to tell her about my fantasies. Besides, they are not about her. They are about Sakura-chan. Don't lie, Kit, you're never any good at it, and don't think you can lie to me, I am in you, remember. I see your memories and dreams as well, and while those dreams you had involved Sakura, they don't anymore, do they? Naruto sighed and had to agree with the Kyuubi as his dreams of Sakura were being replaced by dreams of Kurenai, but he knew that he was not really the kind of guy most women would want to associate with in that sense, and he doubted Sakura would either, despite them being closer than they were back then when they were younger. That might be true, but you realize that I can't do that, because of me, right? Kit, she's a Jonin and she no doubt knows about me being inside of you, and besides that, she already showed that she doesn't see you as a demon herself, so why don't you talk to her? Listen, there's two ways this might end. The first is that you don't tell her and eventually drive yourself mad, or you tell her and deal with the fallout now then later, and while the latter is messy, at least you were honest enough to tell her and you can work in mending things up afterwards. Either way, it's up to you. Naruto sighed and tried to think it over as he heard Kurenai approach. The two sat down to rest at the moment and then Kurenai decided to cook an early dinner so they would be able to rest easily in the night. Naruto agreed and helped the Jonin prepare their food. The meals comprised of roasted fish, dried meat, and vegetable salad, with fruit on the side. As they finished the meals before them, Naruto thought about the words the Kyuubi told him and wondered if he really should. However, he knew that there was truth to what the Kyuubi said about him needing to let loose his emotions and thoughts before they ate him from the inside out, and while he was very hesitant on the matter, he knew that sooner or later, there would be no avoiding the issue soon. So he decided to just get it over with before the time ended and he would be ready for the consequences of his decisions. Kurenai-sensei. Yes, Naruto-kun. I wanted to ask you something. If a guy likes a woman, I mean really likes a woman but is too afraid to say a thing because he's afraid that the woman would reject him, is he going to regret it for the rest of his life? Kurenai thought about that. It was a serious question in her mind and she was surprised that Naruto would ask her on this matter, though it did make sense as she was the only woman on the island that he could talk to about this. Well, in a way he would regret it if he doesn't say what he feels until it's too late and the woman finds another. Why are you asking me that, Naruto-kun? Naruto blushed bright red and thought it over once more and gulped as he spoke. Well, I asked because well, it's kind of embarrassing really, but. Kurenai had a sneaking thought but kept it to herself. She knew that Naruto was an honest guy by nature and would tell her eventually, but it seemed that he needed a little push in the right direction at the moment. Go on, and I promise I won't get angry, Naruto-kun. Naruto gulped and scratched the back of his head and then took a deep breath and spoke. He got this far, he might as well get this over and done with. I've been looking at this woman lately. She's really attractive and all, and I really like her a lot, but I'm afraid that she won't like me back, because of me being a Jinchuriki. But Kurenai knew just where Naruto was going with this. After all, she was guilty of the same thing. She knew that his stares at her direction told her that the woman he was referring to was her. After all, she was the only woman here on the island. But she knew his fears and understood them. Most women would have been horrified at the thought of being the object of attraction for someone who had a demon contained in them, but she didn't see Naruto as a demon, and to know that he was attracted to her was reason enough for her to smile. She decided to tease him a little. This woman must be very special to you. Yes, but still, I am not sure about. Kurenai smiled and replied as she stood up and walked over to the spring. The only way for you to be sure about how she feels is if you ask her, Naruto-kun, so let me ask you something. What is it, Kurenai-sensei? Kurenai turned, and to Naruto's surprise, she removed her Konoha forehead protector and then began to loosen her clothes and smiled at him. Did you know that I like you too? What? I know the woman you're referring to is me, and I am happy that you are attracted to me, because I have to confess something, I am attracted to you too, and I want you, right now. Time. In the area near the spring. Naruto looked at the Jonin with a look of utter surprise and desire as she was now only in her fishnet bodysuit and her wrappings. He had to admit that while he thought Kurenai to be attractive, but here and now, with the light of the moon covering her nearly form, she was divine. The light made her pale skin look like cream and showed her curves very well in his eyes. He could not believe what was about to happen, and he tried to think of something that could help him get a grip on his already growing libido. Kurenai saw the look Naruto was giving her and she smiled warmly. She knew that what she was doing was something of a mistake, but at this point and time, she didn't think of the outcome. It was not immoral as Naruto was already 16, which was the legal age for many young people in Konoha, and she knew of some couples who were married at the same age she was long ago, and therefore, this was a normal thing. And she felt the need to do this. She wanted to know what it was like to make love to a man, and she wanted it badly, and most of all, the knowledge that Naruto was attracted to her and cared for her was enough to get her excited as she was attracted to him. She smiled and slowly began to unwrap the bandages that were part of her outfit, and Naruto looked on with great desire and appreciation. He had no idea how utterly a woman could be at this point and time in his life, but seeing Kurenai remove the bandages and showing more of her undeniably curvaceous and beautiful form before him was driving him wild. It didn't take long for Kurenai to be finally bare of the bandages, and she was now exposed before Naruto except for her fishnet outfit. She smiled and placed the bandages to the side with the rest of her other clothes. And she then walked over and then leaned over to Naruto and kissed him right on the lips. The blonde ninja tried to get his act straight and get control of his hormones for a second, but Kurenai apparently had other ideas as she took his hands and pulled him closer to her. Kurenai-sensei. It's all right, Naruto-kun. The Jonin guided Naruto to the highest area of the spring, right into one of the large pools that was perfect for 2 or more persons. Naruto felt his mind go blank as Kurenai gently eased both herself into the water and him as well, and she then leaned forward once more and kissed him deeply and spoke. Naruto-kun, you don't have to be so shy about this, you're a young man now, and what you're feeling is normal. But, yes, are you all right with this, Kurenai-sensei? Yes, I am, Naruto-kun. I want this so badly, and I want this to be special too. I want this and I need you, Naruto-kun. Will you let me be with you? That alone was enough to break down Naruto's defenses, as the one thing the young genin wanted was to not just be Hokage and to be respected, but needed as well. He wanted not just to be acknowledged, but to be wanted by others and needed by others as well. Yes, he was needed by Sakura and his longtime friends, but this was different altogether. Someone wanted him to make them feel happy, and that was something that made him feel alive. What do you want me to do, Kurenai-chan? Kurenai smiled warmly at the endearment that Naruto gave her. She had not been called that way in a very long time, and she knew that Naruto was too pure-hearted a boy to lie to her for any reason. She knew that what was about to happen would be something that will change the way things were between the two of them, but she was not going to change her mind. She had made the moves on Naruto and she had to deal with the outcome of her actions. Just let me be the one with you tonight, Naruto-kun. Naruto nodded and Kurenai smiled as she reached to her body and slowly removed her fishnet outfit completely, and finally exposing herself before Naruto in full view, and Naruto felt his jaw drop at the sight of the beautiful kunoichi before him, who was now covered with water that was coming from the spray of the spring. It was mid-afternoon after all, and the sun had barely set on them, and this allowed Naruto to see Kurenai's beauty in full force. Kurenai was standing before Naruto in the water, and he looked at her pale white cream-like skin, her angelic face with her deep red eyes burning with a light of desire in them, her long black raven hair which was wet in there like a black silk curtain to her face. The curve and beauty of her neck and chest, and her full S that were firm and thrust out proudly before him, with her deep red S and areoles, her long and slender arms, her slender and womanly hips, then to her flat stomach, and then to the patch of dark hair between her thighs and her long legs, that and the fact that she was apparently blushing and she was smiling at him with her eyes alight made her look like a real goddess to him. When he thought about it now, he couldn't help but feel a combination of awe and confidence, and he had good reason to feel those said emotions. He was considered a demon by others, but here he was, with one of the most desirable and beautiful women of all Konoha. And she and him had known each other in a few days more than anyone else knew each other, and now she wanted him to take her virginity and make love to her. Him, the demon fox container of Konoha, making love to the crimson goddess of Konoha. If anyone told him weeks ago that he was going to be making love to Yuhi Kurenai in a spring, in the middle of an uncharted island, he would have considered them insane and playing a sick joke on him, but seeing is believing, as here he was now. However, he knew that he should have to tell Kurenai that this was going to be his very first time with a woman. However, it seemed that Kurenai had other ideas. Kurenai could tell from the way Naruto acted around her and how he looked at her at this very moment that this was the very first time he had ever seen a woman who was utterly before him at the moment. Hearing about this jutsu he used to frustrate the male ninja in Konoha made her think that he already knew everything there was about women, but the look of awe, desire, and wonder he had on his crimson face told her otherwise, and while he didn't tell her the truth in all the times she had spent with him in conversation on the island, she had a thought that maybe he was. Is this the first time you saw a real woman, Naruto-kun? Yes. Is this your first time? Naruto gulped and gave the barest of nods and blushed bright red so much that Kurenai had a thought that he might pass out from blood loss as she could see a trickle of blood from his nose. Kurenai then decided to kick it up a notch more and smiled seductively and asked the question. Are you a virgin, Naruto-kun? Naruto felt like he was going to die of utter embarrassment. He had saved himself for the day he might be able to be with Sakura-chan, but lately he had been slowly accepting the fact that Sakura and him were better off as friends, and he had a hard time admitting that truth as well. But now here he was with a gorgeous woman who was gloriously before him, and she deserved an answer to her question, no matter how embarrassing it was for him at all. If a woman asked you a question this important, then you had to answer. That was what the pervy sage used to tell him after all when he was training with the old sage and the Hokage's teammate. Why yes. Kurenai smiled at the thought and she couldn't help but feel very happy. She was going to enjoy this a great deal from now on. So we're both virgins, Naruto-kun. Very nice. I won't do anything to hurt you, Naruto-kun, I promise. And she meant it. Kurenai decided to go first as she slowly removed Naruto of his dark shirt, which was rather wet at the moment, and then she smiled as she finally got to run her hands on his hard and well-muscled form. Befitting a ninja's body, Naruto was well-muscled and well-formed, not too bulky or too skinny, just the right mix of both builds, and the fact that there was no trace of fat on his body made it even better. She ran her hands on his shoulders and felt the hardened muscles there, and then his skin. There were some very faint traces of old wounds. But there were no marks at all, thanks to the Kyuubi's chakra that granted the blonde exceptional stamina and regenerative abilities that were considered in hindsight as a valued trait that Naruto had with him, and she was going to see just what else this stamina could be used for apart from fighting. She blushed at the thoughts, her cheeks taking the same color of her eyes. Naruto gasped as he felt Kurenai's hands touching his skin. He had undergone feeling a person's hands on his skin, namely when in a medical examination, but this was the first time he was being touched in a very different sense, and it excited him as he ed, making Kurenai smile, and she reached out and took in his own hands and then guided the blonde to touch her own skin. Naruto gulped as she placed his hands on her face and she spoke. Your turn, Naruto-kun, don't be shy. Naruto gulped as he felt the smoothness of Kurenai's white skin, and he couldn't help himself as he gently moved his hands on her face and then to her lips, marveling at the softness and smoothness underneath his palms as he moved to her chest, and Kurenai smiled as she gently guided him to her full S, and she ed out loud as she felt his hot and rough palms on her S. Naruto blushed to the point that he was amazed that he didn't faint from the amounts of blood. Her S were full and very soft, but well proportioned, and Naruto wondered just how did she manage to fit into her outfit. That was thrown out the window, however, as he looked at the deep red tips of her S, and he couldn't help but be drawn to them. Kurenai smiled and she moved back and brought Naruto with her until she was sitting on the stone edge of the pool they were in, and Naruto kneeled before her and she gently ran her hands on his back and marveled at the muscles there, and then to his chest and stomach, smiling at the feel of his skin and flesh, and then tracing the seal where the Kyuubi was sealed in him as a baby. It made her heart ache at the thought of it all. He was so young, to carry this mark and the burden of being a Jinchuriki for all his life and still be strong and brave. I am happy that he was not alone and given a good life as best can be managed. If Naruto-kun was treated far worse, then who knows how he would have turned out. She placed that aside and saw how Naruto gazed at her. His eyes were alight with desire, and she smiled as she could still feel her lover's hands on her S. Go ahead, Naruto-kun. In its cage in Naruto's mind, the Kyuubi was enjoying the show immensely, and it was chuckling with its mouth in a tooth-filled grin. Well now, This is going to be one great show. Naruto gulped and recalled what he had managed to read in one of the pervy sage's novels when Jiraiya had asked him to proofread one of the books. In them, a young man had to be gentle with touching a lady's ass. The description made him shake his head and think of it as boring, but not this time as he slowly moved his hands, hoping to the gods above that he was doing the right thing at the moment. The last thing he wanted to do was foul up and get Kurenai angry, so he slowly moved his hands and tried his best to make Kurenai happy. However, Kurenai, being a virgin herself, was very sensitive to the touch and she loved the feel of Naruto's hands, though she planned to make sure that he would be able to touch and feel her as the way she wanted. She ed out her pleasure and that helped Naruto with his actions as she guided his hands with her own, and Naruto quickly began to get into the hang of things. Technically Naruto was not very smart but of average intelligence, but his ability to quickly learn things was exceptional and many have admitted to his learning curve. After all, he had learned the Rasengan in a week where it had taken the fourth several years to do the same thing, and that fact spoke of his inner talents and inner potential. And it seemed that while still unused to being with women, his ability of rapidly learning and improvisation made do as he began to massage Kurenai's ass in the way that she happened to like. Naruto then felt Kurenai's hands reach to his head gently and she moved his head towards her ass and she spoke. "I want more, Naruto-kun. I want you to, and if you want to." That was enough to make Naruto blush even more than before, and he gave into the undeniably tempting suggestion Kurenai gave as he leaned forward and took Kurenai's left into his hands and gently played with the fleshy tip, and Kurenai ed her approval and he then slowly took it into his mouth. "Oh yes." Kurenai ed out as Naruto slowly began to use his lips and tongue to play with her ass and the blonde's gentle ing and ing of her and made her feel even hotter as he continued with his actions. She felt her body grow hotter and wetter as she ed her pleasure and prodded Naruto on. He broke the action minutes later and her disappointed died away as he gave the very same loving treatment to her right hand. The blonde ninja wanted to give the other boob the same treatment and it made Kurenai hum in approval and desire as she held Naruto closer to he would continue his actions. She tastes so good. Naruto was in heaven as he continued to lay attention on Kurenai's ass as he massaged her left and her hard with his hands, and since Kurenai didn't halt him and prodded him on with s and sounds of pleasure and the way she would gently run her hands on his head and back. Kurenai was in bliss at the feeling as she had never felt this way before. She had been forced at times by Anko to join her longtime friend to watch movies, namely the more pornographic type, but she had never realized how utterly delicious it was. She then decided to return the favor as she moved Naruto's head away. Naruto's attempt to ask what she was doing was halted when she kissed him deeply, and then she leaned forward until Naruto himself was in the water, and this allowed Kurenai to feel his body more evenly, and she ed her lips as she kissed Naruto deeply, and then as she broke the kiss, she moved to his face and kissed him gently, evening the whisker marks on his cheeks, making him shiver with pleasure, and that made Kurenai smile even more as she began to trace her hands on him, and then she made her way down to his chest and decided to do the very same thing that he had done, and she began to kiss his own chest and then ed Naruto's own s, and that had results as the blonde ninja howled in pleasured surprise. "KK Kurenai-chan. WHWH, what are you doing?" I wondered on how would men react if their s were ed the same way by a woman, and it seems we're finding out Naruto-kun. Naruto blushed as Kurenai reached down and touched his, which was making a rather large tent in his boxer shorts. Kurenai smiled as she rubbed her left thigh gently on the tent in Naruto's boxers while ing his s, and the combination made Naruto feel as if he was in heaven at this very moment. Kurenai then decided to move on to the next step and removed herself from Naruto's chest, and she kissed every inch of Naruto's toned chest and stomach, and then she smiled as she reached the belt of his boxers, and with little resistance from the blonde ninja, Kurenai removed his boxers and she saw his. Wow! 8 to 10 inches, who knew? I think the Kyuubi has something to do with this. Kurenai smiled as she looked at Naruto's. The blonde apparently had no idea how most young men his age would kill to be as well formed and gifted like he was at this very moment, and how many women would have fainted at the sight of his being this long and thick. She ran her hands gently on his and smiled warmly as it twitched in her hands, and she liked that as this told her that no one else had ever done this to Naruto, and she felt even more excited and honored by this. But this place was not very comfortable as she rose up and then spoke to Naruto. Let's go somewhere more comfortable. Naruto didn't argue with Kurenai as he got up as they walked back to the ground, and as they were away from the spring, Naruto hugged Kurenai from behind and she smiled as she turned her head to the side, and they kissed deeply with one another as Naruto gently ran his hands on her body, the sleek water making it easier and more erotic for them both. The two reached the lean-to and then slowly moved down, and Kurenai made Naruto lean back on the bed, and she smiled as she gently ran her hands on his body once more and then all the way to his, and Naruto was enjoying it as she gently moved her hands on his, making it harder and twitch as well. Kurenai knew that she was still unused to all this and she was only doing what she thought would work as she had never done this. But she began to figure out how Naruto liked to be touched, and the way Naruto ed and said her name was enough to tell her that she was doing it well enough. Kurenai-chan. Kurenai smiled even more at the endearment and then decided to try the things she saw a woman do to a man in this same situation when Anko got her to watch that video a few months ago. She ed Naruto slowly at the tip and tasted a bit of his pre-cum, making him out in utter pleasure as she tasted the liquid. Not bad. I can get used to that. Kurenai wasted no time as she ed the sides and the underside. Her actions made Naruto shout out in utter desire and passion, and the way he ed her name made her hotter as she decided to slowly take the tip into her mouth, slowly taking it in inch by inch. Naruto gasped and looked to see Kurenai taking in his, and it made him look on with awe and amazement. To think that Kurenai would do that to him, it was unreal, but undeniably real. The feel of her soft lips on his was driving him mad, and then the feel of his in her hot mouth made Naruto grip the bed sheet hard, with his knuckles turning white and his body heating up with desire and lust as Kurenai continued to take in more of his. Kurenai stopped for a minute as she managed to control her gag reflex and then took it in even more, and Naruto's finally touched the back of her throat, and despite her control of her gag reflex, there was 1 inch that she couldn't take in anymore, so she had no choice but be content with what she could manage at the moment. She relaxed there and left her saliva coat Naruto's so as to make it easier, and once she was sure, she began to move her head carefully. Naruto ed at the feel of Kurenai's mouth on her, and it was driving him mad, but he restrained himself as he allowed Kurenai to do what she liked. Jiraiya had taught him in the traveling days that if ever the woman wanted something from you during lovemaking, you give it to her without asking any questions, unless she has a question for you or a request. Kurenai was enjoying this, and she could tell that Naruto was enjoying it as well as she was, and that made her feel more confident with her actions. She thought before that this was dirty and disgusting and she would never do this with anyone. But now she was thinking differently about the whole thing. She felt empowered, and confident, as she realized that she could bring down a man with pleasure like this easily, but she realized that since she was quite new to this, that meant Naruto was as well. Naruto proved that assumption to be accurate as he cried out, "KK Kurenai-chan, I." Naruto screamed out his release, and Kurenai could only brace herself as she felt Naruto's twitch, and then she felt his release his hot seed right into her mouth and the back of her throat. She relaxed herself and allowed Naruto to continue releasing his seed, and the feel of it was hot in her mouth as she slowly moved back, and there was a last spurt and some of his seed got on her face, but she didn't mind as she tasted the seed and found it to be nice to her taste buds, and she swallowed it and saw Naruto looking at her with wide eyes and a fierce blush on his face. Naruto had tried to warn Kurenai, and when he failed he managed to recover from his orgasm and tried to apologize to Kurenai, but seeing the red-eyed Jonin swallow his seed willingly had made him even more aroused than he ever thought possible, and he hungered to kiss and touch her all over again. He wanted to make her and scream his name the same way she made him scream hers. And Kurenai was more than willing to grant Naruto that chance as she spoke to Naruto. "You want to do the same thing, Naruto-kun?" Naruto nodded enthusiastically, and Kurenai allowed him to move forward, and he was now over her as he went to kissing the woman. His desire, passion, and love for Kurenai driving him on as he kissed his way to her S, and after placing great attention to the fleshy orbs in her deep red S, he moved on and marveled at the feel of her skin in her stomach, along with her womanly hips, and he saw the well-trimmed patch of midnight black hair between her legs, and then he saw it, her, and the blonde ninja could only stare in awe as he realized that he was looking at a woman's most private place. The sight of the red outer lips and the wetness there made Naruto feel greater desire, and the smell he picked up was making him even more aroused, and he looked at Kurenai, who was blushing at him, no doubt due to the way he stared at her, and she nodded and he moved closer. He admitted that he had no idea how to do this with a woman, but he was willing to try either way. With Kurenai prodding him on, he moved closer, and getting the strong smell of her arousal into his nose, he gently kissed the lips, and Kurenai's of approval told him quickly that he was on the right track, and he slowly began to kiss Kurenai's wet, and when he tasted her honey, he loved the taste and began to slowly pick up the pace, and he knew that he had to allow time to tell him how Kurenai liked this. Naruto-kun, right there, yes. Kurenai gently guided Naruto as he explored her, and she relished the pleasure as Naruto ed and kissed her wet as she felt herself getting hotter and wetter with every sensation Naruto gave her as he ed and kissed her. It was when she guided him to her and told him to gently part her outer lips did things get even hotter for Kurenai. The blonde ninja followed her instructions, and she was happy beyond belief as wave after wave of pleasure flooded her senses in the way she liked immensely as Naruto continued to kiss her, along with her. She's so beautiful. Naruto would stop and look at Kurenai on a few moments to see the deep blush on her face with each action he gave towards her, and the way she said her name was very much intoxicating to the blonde ninja as he continued with his actions, and it was then that he decided to try something and pushed his tongue past Kurenai's inner lips. The Jonin shouted his name and she ed, urging him on with pants and words thick with pleasure, and he did so, pushing and pulling his tongue, and he tasted her honey as it gushed out from her. Naruto-kun, I'm going to. Naruto held on and continued his actions on Kurenai's wet, and sure enough, the virgin Kurenai felt her orgasm hit her for the very first time, and it was heavenly as she felt her body explode in pleasure. Naruto felt her inner move in such a way that caressed his tongue that he couldn't help but feel enthralled by it all. Kurenai's new release of her inner juices were also welcome as Naruto lapped up more of it. Kurenai was in heaven, but she knew that this was merely a taste of what was soon to come, and she spoke to Naruto despite the still overwhelming effects of her previous orgasm. Naruto-kun, please, take me. Naruto gulped as he got between Kurenai's legs and slowly positioned himself in front of Kurenai's now wet and the sight of the Jonin covered in sweat, breathing heavily from her previous orgasm and looking at him with pleasure-filled eyes was intoxicating. Kurenai smiled at him with passionate desire and affection and nodded to his unspoken question, giving him her agreement. He knew enough about hearing stories of couples doing this to get some idea as he slowly pushed his forward, and Kurenai willingly guided him into her with her hands. Ah! Both Naruto and Kurenai said at the same time as Naruto's parted her wet folds with no effort, and Kurenai called out to her lover to go deeper, and Naruto followed her demand as he pushed in deeper into her wet and tight, marveling at the feel of it all as he pushed in even deeper as Kurenai's accepted his into itself and stretched to accommodate his. Oh God! Naruto-kun, you're so big. Kurenai felt her inner womanhood stretch to take in Naruto's, and she felt her body being filled to the brim. It was an utterly delicious and fulfilling sensation that made her out in utter pleasure, and when Naruto stopped, she was surprised, but when she looked she saw his concern and worry. Is it too much, Kurenai-chan? Kurenai smiled at the concern Naruto showed towards her, showing his kindness and gentle nature. If only the people saw him as the kind-hearted boy he really was instead of a demon container, he would have never been alone, but after learning so much of him, she decided that despite the fact that she was going to hurt Hinata if she found out about this, she wanted to be the one to love Naruto the way a woman would love a man. With those thoughts in mind, she shook her head and replied. No, go on Naruto-kun, fill me to the brim. Naruto nodded and pushed in his more, and in a few moments, due to Kurenai's great wetness, he had reached the end as his hips were now touching hers, and she ed out her desire and she spoke in soft but utterly pleasure-filled words. You're inside me, so deep, you fill me Naruto-kun. Kurenai-chan, you're so hot, wet, and tight, Naruto couldn't say anything else as he felt Kurenai's womanhood accept his full length, showing that due to her life as a kunoichi, Kurenai had no doubt torn her maidenhead, and while that made it seem that she was no longer a virgin, she still was one as her was so tight, and the lack of a barrier allowed Naruto to push his full length into her wet. Kurenai was in utter pleasure in all this and she couldn't help but gasp at the feel of it all, but now there was a hunger in her body, a feeling in need, and she wanted something to happen and only Naruto could make it happen. She moved her hips a bit. And Naruto got the message quickly and managed to get his knowledge gleaned from reading Jiraiya's novels when he was bored. He slowly pulled back his hips and Kurenai gasped at the feel of his moving in her own, and when Naruto was almost out, he slowly pushed right back in, making Kurenai gasp out in utter pleasure and lust as the sensations flooded her body and filled her to the core. As soon as he was nearly out, he pushed right back in, and Kurenai gasped at the delicious sensations that flood her body the very second it happened. Oh yes, Naruto-kun, right there. Kurenai-chan, so hot, so tight. Naruto began to move his hips and soon established a rhythm with his actions, and the sensations that flooded his mind made him want to scream in joy. The heat, the wetness, the tightness and the softness of Kurenai's all around him made him feel as if he would burn alive in pleasure, and there was a desire to continue on with what he was doing, and he did so as he moved his hips in and out of Kurenai's wet as he felt it caress and tighten on his deeply. Kurenai ed out her pleasure and joy as Naruto continued to thrust deeply into her warm and wet, and the feeling of his filling her to the brim was intoxicating to her and something that she had never thought possible as she clutched the bed sheet below her very tightly. She ed and screamed out her pleasure as Naruto continued to thrust deep and hard into her, increasing his actions greatly and picking up speed with each thrust he gave to her. More. Ah, yes. Naruto was in heaven. That was the only word to describe the pleasure he was feeling at the moment, and it fit the bill as he continued to thrust harder and deeper into Kurenai's hot, and the woman didn't mind at all as she shouted, and screamed her pleasure to him, and Naruto obliged her demands as he picked up the pace. He then took her long and slender legs and placed them on his shoulders, allowing him to thrust even deeper into her wet, and Kurenai relished the change and ed out her pleasure as she played with her s. And as both were new to this, it was not long before both reached the limits. Kurenai, Naruto, both orgasmed at the same time, and Kurenai shouted as she felt her being filled by several large spurts of Naruto's hot seed that touched her inner walls at the very moment of her release, tripling the pleasure she felt, and she felt like she was going to faint from all the sensations of passion, desire, joy, pleasure, and more as she felt Naruto's seed flood her. She was thankful that she was not fertile at the moment as she was not yet ready to have children, but she placed that aside as she relished the memory of the white-hot pleasure she felt. Naruto likewise shouted his pleasure as he fired his seed into Kurenai's, and he felt her inner sheath move and caress his in such a way that he felt even more pleasure flood his brain like a tidal wave, and he relished the heat of Kurenai's, and he felt himself release even more of his seed into her body and wanted to fill her to the brim. Both lovers looked at each other and smiled warmly and thought that they were in heaven at this very moment and time, and they didn't care at all as the pleasure was still there. Naruto leaned down and kissed Kurenai deeply, and she reciprocated with her own passionate and fierce kiss. This made Naruto thrust his into her wet vagina a bit more, making Kurenai ed into the kiss before he stopped and moved away from her with some effort, as while he didn't want to hurt her in some fashion, he was sure that she would need to recover as he gently moved her legs down from his shoulders as he pulled his away from Kurenai's wet. As Naruto moved away from Kurenai and lay down next to the red-eyed woman who smiled at him as she looked at him, she was somewhat surprised when he bit his lip to draw blood. Naruto-kun, why did you do that? Just wanted to be sure this was all real and not a genjutsu. Kurenai looked at her lover with some confusion, and then she smiled as she reached towards Naruto and kissed him on the lips gently, and when she was done kissing him she wiped away the trickle of blood from his lip and spoke. It's no genjutsu, Naruto-kun, it's all real. I guess so, thank you Kurenai-chan. The two fell asleep under the lean-to for the night, but not before Naruto reached for a blanket and covered both himself and Kurenai, making the Jonin smile and kiss him yet again until they were able to sleep. The next day, Kurenai woke up first and saw Naruto sitting there on the spring, looking at her with a very happy smile, and she smiled right back at her lover, and she slowly stood up and walked over to him, unmindful of the fact that like him, she was as well. The Jonin sat down next to Naruto and looked at him, and Naruto spoke. Kurenai-chan, about last night. Kurenai was a bit concerned about that and wondered if he regretted the whole thing. Naruto, however, seemed to sense the question and replied, "No, I don't regret it, it was amazing, and I am honest enough to say I would never imagine doing it with someone as beautiful as you, Kurenai-chan." "Thank you, Naruto-kun, but I know that there's something bothering you. What is it?" Naruto gulped and replied, "I know things will never be the same between you and me if we get back to Konoha somehow, but I think that I might have ruined you for the guy you might really want." Kurenai smiled and spoke gently to him as she kissed him on the cheek. "I already found the guy the first want, Naruto Hinata, and he's you." "Me? I don't know what to say, but I'm honored." "You're welcome, and I am honored in my own way. I got to know you more and found you to be the right guy, and I promise to be there when you need me." "I will be there when you need me too." Kurenai smiled and kissed Naruto deeply, and he reciprocated the gesture, and the two lovers were in a passionate embrace for a few minutes until they knew that they had a lot of things to do, and reluctantly they decided to get dressed. And when they were fully dressed, the blonde ninja released the cage bushin he was famous for to scout out for ships, leaving him and Kurenai with time to cook breakfast. However, it didn't take long for Naruto to give a cry, and Kurenai wondered what was going on until Naruto turned to her and spoke. One of the cage bushin saw a ship, Kurenai-chan, and turned on the signal fire. "It's coming this way." Kurenai was utterly relieved by the news, and both rushed over to the beach where the cage bushin had started the fire, and as they arrived, they saw that the ship was being joined by several others. It seemed that rescue was already on their way, as the two smiled and waited for the ships to get closer for them to get on board. The two held hands secretly and silently promised each other that they were going to keep their new relationship a secret for the time being until things were going to be all right for it to be announced. Epilogue. Naruto smiled as he ran through the forest near Konoha and was hoping that he would be able to find out what Kurenai wanted from him, and why of all the places where they could talk, she wanted it to be outside of the village. He had gotten the message from the Jonin only a few minutes ago, and then he decided to go and see just what was it that Kurenai wanted at the moment. The genin was still in his usual outfit as he ran through the trees in his usual fashion, and then thought back on the letter that he had gotten earlier. He was to meet Kurenai at a certain spot in the forest where a spring was located and wait for her there. "I wonder what Kurenai-chan wants from me." Naruto had gotten used to calling Kurenai by that endearment in private, when they were away from the eyes of others and were close, and assured that no one knew of the time they had spent on the island when they got back, and what had happened between the two of them at that time. Kurenai still did her missions with her team and hanged out with her fellow Jonin and her students, and he worked with his own team and his Jonin sensei. He had began to see Sakura as a great friend, as her romantic affections were no directed towards a certain red-eyed woman. There had been some private times between them whenever they had the chance, and their growing relationship was very discreet as far as things went, and those were good times as well. As soon as he arrived at the area specified in Kurenai's note, he wondered where Kurenai was, and he leaned on a nearby tree to wait for her as the day turned to night. However, he was suddenly surprised when the tree suddenly began to reach out with rapidly growing branches that bound him. The genin was about to panic when a certain voice spoke seductively into his ear. "It's all right, Naruto Hinata, it's just me. Kurenai-chan, I should have known it was you since you're highly skilled at genjutsu." And sure enough, Kurenai made her way out from the tree as she was now behind her lover as the tree faded from view, and Kurenai was right there with Naruto. The Jonin smiled as she ran her hands on Naruto's chest, and she slowly unzipped his jacket, and Naruto didn't resist her actions, and he didn't want to either. As soon as his jacket was opened, Kurenai ran her hands on his body and smiled at the feel of his well-formed build as she moved forward bit more and made a hand seal. Kai. Naruto turned as soon as he was assured that Kurenai had released the genjutsu, and he felt his mouth open at the sight of Kurenai dressed only in what would be described as very scandalous, as she was only wrapped in well-cut pieces of red silk that were made to resemble undergarments which were held by black cloth as well, with simple knots that were easy to remove. Kurenai smiled warmly at the look of utter desire in Naruto's face as she did a seductive pose and spoke to Naruto. You like? Yes. Naruto said without reservation as he nodded vigorously to Kurenai as she reached out to him and they held each other as she leaned forwards and kissed her lover deeply as she pushed him back a bit and she ran her hands on his face and spoke. You're still too heavily dressed, Naruto-kun. I think it's time we loosen these up. Kurenai-chan, while I think you are stunning and I would love this a lot, why did you ask me to come here? I figured this place will be nice, Naruto Anata. After all, it's been a while since we've had this time to be alone. I guess. By the way, why here? Kurenai smiled as she kissed Naruto deeply and replied. You should know by now. This is the first anniversary of our relationship, and I figured this will be a good a place as any. And don't worry about the others, I had special wards to protect this place, along with the highest level genjutsu I know, so, ready to wrap your anniversary gift, Naruto-chan. Hi. Naruto decided not to argue as he kissed Kurenai once more and he felt his body react to her presence as she guided